back there every night, I go back there every night. I know it isn't real, but the terror is real. I'm a hero. God help me. It's part of me now, and I can't escape it.
The main fanzine that talked about this kind of film was Deep Red, which was Chaz Ballin's fanzine after he left Fangoria magazine.
I first heard of Combat Shock the way I think a lot of people my age probably did, that being through Chaz Ballin's Deep Red magazine.
Combat Shock got sent to me via Chaz Ballin, who was integral in cluing anybody who was anybody into what the fuck was going on.
And I remember very vividly, it was the Day of the Dead issue with this great Dr. Logan cover. And Day of the Dead might have been the cover story, but Combat Shock was definitely the star article.
So I watched the film, I was like, Jesus Christ, you know, I mean, this is what it is. I mean, it's a low-budget film, yes, but it's way more to the heart of something very deep in American society.
It's hard to explain. I need help. We can't make it out here. I've been out of work for 4 months. We have no food, no anything. We're being thrown into the street.
I'd never heard of the film before, I'd never heard of the filmmaker before, but the photos were so stark and Chaz's text was just so invigorating. I mean, it had me on fire. I had to see this movie now, and I was willing to beg Cheater Steele to see it.
It's just a real gritty, true-to-life, down and dirty like kind of movie. Somebody said to me, this movie almost like stinks. Not in a bad, like the movie doesn't stink like it's a bad movie. It was just so vile that it smelled.
You know, there's the Woody Allen line, I think it's from Annie Hall, where he goes, you know, the world is divided by the miserable and the horrible. And I think that kind of sums up Combat Shock. It's a movie where shooting his wife and baby, and it's the happiest part of the movie.
The film was quite disturbing. It's one of the most, in fact, it's one of the most disturbing films I've ever seen, and I honestly mean that. That's weird.
And finally, the way I saw the film was I wrote to Chaz Ballin directly and got a tape from him. And I remember the day the tape arrived in the mail, it was such a big deal. Like, I called up a whole bunch of my friends, and it was like, Combat Shock is here! You know, and everyone came over, and it was Combat Shock night. And, you know, we were destroyed. Like, it killed every single one of us.
Combat Shock, you've got all of this subtext and all of this weirdness.
My initial reaction to viewing Combat Shock, the same as everyone else's, would have been one of palpable horror, disgust. It's difficult to enjoy Combat Shock.
It still haunts me and still stays with me. It's really creepy.
This is Taxi Driver stripped away of Manhattan.
But Buddy somehow keyed into really the darkest side. I mean, even past the Travis Bickle, you know, kind of a mentality of an American Psycho.
Travis Bickle, I mean, Frankie compared to Travis, come on, I mean, Travis is an upscale guy. I mean, he's dating, he's driving a cab in Manhattan, he's doing well, you know, but Frankie, I mean, he's going to the unemployment lines.
The unemployment lines and stuff. I mean, I think Buddy is now vindicated because that's what we have in the country now. We have people, you know, standing on lines around the corner waiting to collect unemployment.
We're still in a recession. People are still unemployed, and now we've just got the Gulf War instead of Vietnam, and everyone's coming back from a different war and having terrible problems getting work and no money around, and that side of the movie hasn't changed one bit.
Maybe I should be thinking of Buddy more as a prophet than some guy who has the most bleak outlook on life.
He's really the basic lowest common denominator of war-shocked veterans. And that's, you know, this film went so much deeper into that particular category than Taxi Driver ever could.
First time I met Buddy G, he was a Gore Gazette subscriber, short filmmaker. We'd be in touch here and there. I didn't hear from him for about 7, 8 months. And I thought maybe something might have happened to him because he was the guy that lived on the fringe. And after 8 months, he called, he goes, I got it, I finished. My movie's done, American Nightmares. I would like you to screen it for me. I said, I've seen your shorts, book it. We showed the film, packed pretty much with the people that had put up the money for the film and his friends. It just fucking blew me away. I don't think I'd ever shown or had a better reception at any screening than American Nightmares, which was what it was called at the time. When Buddy told me that he had made his deal with Trauma, and he's truly a nice guy in an industry which is full of scumbags, I did everything I could to get Combat Shock booked into as many venues as I could. I was all excited about it. I wanted to see what it looked like, the 35mm blow up and blah, blah, blah. Went and sat down and I said, wow, they took a big bite out of this movie. Back in those grindhouse theaters, if you could use any excuse to get your money back. I remember that night, opening night of Combat Shock, there were at least a dozen people that said, hey, this is supposed to be a fucking war movie, and it ain't.
Maggots. They're starting to hatch. And as long as I'm bleeding, spines will be attracted to me.
I would say, all right, you can either have your money back or you can have 6 passes. And I didn't refund a cent. And still the audiences were still knocked on their ass. You gotta remember, this is primarily black and Hispanic, you know, people that are used to Jason movies, Leatherface, seeing this real gritty slice of life sort of thing. And same reaction, just like you could hear a pin drop in the theater where they usually talk, Jason, yo, whoa, 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 watch out, that Jason, that motherfucker, he's there. I was looking around and people's mouths were open. And to me, that's always a good sign. When someone's watching a film and they're like that, it was good.
My friend Carl Daft and I used to go to these all-night horror film festivals in London, and one of them was being organised called Splatterfest.
Splatterfest was a film festival that was put together by myself and Graham Ray, who was a horror journalist back then.
And it probably had the best lineup of all the ones that we went to.
Combat Shock was produced about the same time as Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer, and I got contacted by these people in London that were putting on this 24-hour festival called Splatterfest, and hadn't been to London before, and they were paying, so I went to London. And one of the pictures, I mean, it was 24 hours of horror pictures, and Buddy's picture was playing.
Back in Britain at the time, there was very heavy censorship, and a lot of films like Buddy Giovinazzo's, American Nightmares, or Combat Shock, were not available. So there was this underground network of VHS tape swapping and what have you, and all of these movies that weren't available. And we thought it would be a really good idea, at the time, to put together a festival which showcased only these films.
Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer, Bride of Reanimator, Document of the Dead, Within the Woods, the precursor to The Evil Dead that Scott Spiegel brought over.
Everybody was talking about Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer, and that's a genius movie, of course. But Combat Shock is kind of like the little underachiever.
Many years ago, Buddy and I and John McNaughton, having done Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer, were invited to go to London for some kind of a horror film festival. I was bringing Document of the Dead. Buddy was bringing Combat Shock. And Buddy and I were already friends. We hadn't met McNaughton. We were thrilled to meet him. We went over, and the fellow that organized the festival was a very young guy who couldn't believe that everyone actually came.
It was basically a kick-ass bill of movies.
Splatterfest was mostly all gore horror pictures, and it was pretty much out of the mainstream, it could be called a mainstream for that genre of picture, that was being shown. It was mostly horror. It was a more serious picture, and it stood out.
We went downtown to see the the inn where Jack the Ripper hung out, you know, where he would pick his victims, and it was late at night, and some toothless, weird guy started telling us he was going to lead us somewhere interesting, and I started following him, and Buddy's saying, "Roy, I'm not following you. I'm not going in there." It was just like down into this dark pit, you know? And I'm saying, you know, come on, this is interesting. And Buddy's like, nope. Later on, we're flying home, and we're hitting the worst turbulence. And I'm saying, Buddy, we've had it. And he's saying, this is great, man. He's laughing, having a great time. So and it was interesting seeing the different things that got us upset.
Combat Shock, I think, was one of the first films that they showed. They showed Henry first, which I had seen a few times, and then they showed Combat Shock.
Buddy was the first filmmaker that I contacted. He was the first filmmaker to say yes, and which is amazingly generous of him. And it was the first film that we confirmed for our festival, and you know, and I still remember the reaction that that film had today.
And I just remember the audience was blown away by this movie.
Rapturous applause and cheers. It was just this constant silence, but it was 450 people just riveted in silence.
I thought it held up really well. I thought it was a really good picture. Of course, it makes you want to slit your wrist.
What was the military film? It wasn't Hamburger Hill. Platoon. I remember that night of opening night of Combat Shock. I thought it was going to be like a low-budget version of that.
You only had a couple of ways to really sell a film to the public. The title, the trailer, the poster.
Well, the initial release of Combat Shock wasn't one of the most amusing things, was always the way it was marketed as a straight-up action movie.
The best thing about the poster was it was such an obvious, hilarious, like, low-end dive into exploitation.
While on one hand I applaud Troma for picking it up and putting it out there, I think they tried to hedge their bets. The poster's nothing like the movie.
The poster with all the guns and the action on the outside of it would have sort of drawn in an audience more used to the Warriors, or kind of expecting something closer to First Blood.
They didn't understand the movie, for one. They realized that it was good filmmaking, and so they said, well, we got to do this somehow into a Rambo explosion.
You know, then it was in that pathetic 80s period when they, you know, came full circle, and we're gonna re-win the war now in our fantasies, remember? And I thought it might be more in that genre when I saw the poster, you know, or the Chuck Norris movies, Braddock, where I mean, it was pathetic. Even David Carradine would go back, right, and now we're winning. We're gonna win it, even if it was just a POW rescue mission after the fact, right? You know, and blowing up gooks right and left.
Whereas, in fact, the film itself is a sort of collision between, yes, Suicide, the Frankie Teardrop song, and Razorhead, and maybe a dash of Taxi Driver for seasoning. But it's certainly a much grungier and more grueling experience than anyone going in would probably have expected.
They went for the throat, and of course it failed because the film was never that to start with.
I always think that's a bit dangerous, you know, people walking in to see something and it's not what they wanted. Under different circumstances, if they'd been honestly represented, they probably would have thought it was great, you know? And I can just imagine people walking in, seeing this kind of war stuff, and then wondering what they had walked into, you know? So I don't know if this kind of slick advertising pays off.
The war is not over. The battlefield may have changed, but the war is not over. And you were right, Dad. Your son died in Saigon. But now I've got to save my family.
I think that tonally, Combat Shock and Maniac have a lot in common.
Obviously, Buddy G had seen Maniac many, many times.
They were both shot in the same time period in New York, more or less.
Nihilism is there, the alienation.
Combat Shock was filmed in 16 millimeter, so was Maniac. So they both have that gritty, urban look to them.
What got me most of all was the landscape. I was entranced by it, you know, the film is slowly paced and it is exactly right, you know, I mean, you just wander through this nightmare landscape.
He goes from like, he goes from like the worst of Vietnam to this urban hellhole. I'm not sure where they shot it, but it looks like it might have been like Staten Island or something.
I didn't doubt at the time that there must have been some attractive areas of Staten Island, but for someone in the state of mind of the protagonist, this had to be all he saw.
He wakes up and the whole day starts with sour milk, and the toilet's broken, and he's got the mutant kid squealing, and his wife nagging him.
I'm starving. The baby's starving.
So I'm hungry too.
Then do something about it.
What do you want me to do?
That whole mise en scène was memorable.
Above everything else, Combat Shock is about the horrors of poverty and the terror of losing absolutely all control over everything around you and your circumstances.
To me, Henry is a character study about some individuals, some highly damaged individuals that do things that are very horrific, but there's no fantasy, nor was there fantasy in Combat Shock.
You have a very troubled central character.
You know, I think you're really cracking up. You are going crazy.
Through flashbacks, you saw how he was damaged.
It's almost like, not snuff, a snuff film, but it's almost like he's just really chronicling this guy's really extremely depressing and horrifying life.
It was like a vision of somebody who was either on bad acid or clinically depressed or both, and I think that's that filter, and you have to see it that's the genius of it, is that he made you see that. He put you in that guy's head.
I never went to Vietnam, mercifully, but many of my friends did, and not one of them was the same person who went off there. Their lives were all pretty bumpy after coming back from Vietnam.
Yeah, it speaks to the heart in some kind of dark way. I mean, certainly the experience of being in a war and then coming back to the real world again must have been very similar to that for a lot of folk. I mean, very hard to ever really join on again to conventional society.
I think Van Bever at one point, you say he lives on the West Coast, right? So he can't get me. But I think at one point Van Bever used to try to say that Deadbeat at Dawn came out, preceded American Nightmares, or just to, get the jump on Buddy, but it really didn't.
For some reason, Deadbeat at Dawn and Combat Shock are sort of joined in some sort of bad straitjacket together, I think, primarily because their release dates and because they feature protagonists that wear long, dark coats who are out of luck and, struggling, but that's where it ends.
Buddy was, on his own. His ideas happened to fall into play with Henry and those other nihilistic films in Maniac in the early 80s and stuff like that. He was a true original.
I mean, Deadbeat at Dawn is a kung fu fantasy film. Combat Shock is a real deadly look at a problem that America has never really addressed. I mean, we can go back to the best years of your lives, Frederick March and shit. I mean, that kind of shit. I mean, it's the same film. It's just updated. And it'll never go away. And that's why Buddy is a fucking genius.
It's morning again in America. And under the leadership of President Reagan, our country is prouder and stronger and better. Why would we ever want to return to where we were less than 4 short years ago?
The 80s, they kind of sucked. It was the me years where rich got richer, poor got poorer.
And the 80s was a very bad time for horror, the late 80s was.
Look at the history of what was going on in the late 80s.
Censorship had taken over everywhere, even in the US, so the slasher genre had kind of petered out and everything was really just kind of this really anemic, unbloody, undisturbing horror?
I think a lot of this comes down to our definition of the word horror, in that obviously before all this blew up back into the 70s and the early 80s, as with now, people tended to imagine that horror movies were all about masked psychos or abstract supernatural threats coming out of nowhere and disrupting the regular routine of suburban life.
In the 70s, there became a subgenre of horror films that focused on a serial killer or a contemporary real-life monster versus a make-believe monster.
When the slasher genre was going on in the 80s, they were all really kind of glossy and geared towards kind of making people giggle or very safely scared. And I think Maniac was the one that was really just a disgusting, disturbing film.
Serial killers were being written about a lot. You had Ted Bundy, Son of Sam, Henry Lee Lucas. They were becoming kind of pop culture characters. The horror movies began to reflect these people. I know that, as an example, Maniac was a compilation of several of these serial killers, and there was a couple of others who Joe referenced in his character.
Ironically, Chaz Ballin did not like Maniac, as was the case with a lot of the horror press at the time.
Maniac opened to great controversy, mainly because the poster epitomized or symbolized everything that was being attacked in the media and by well-intended political groups.
I think Chaz Ballin called it something like vile snuff film produced by former pornographers.
We had, of course, a killer standing in a pool of blood with what appears to be an erection in his pants, holding a woman's scalp.
It came out of left field amongst all these other slashers and the Italian horror that was coming at the time, which was more kind of fun. You know, it was more kind of ridiculous violence rather than something that really could be seen as real and sleazy and dirty, which Maniac was.
It became a lightning rod for the attacks on horror films and the violence in movies at that time.
And I think that is very much more in line with the way that these filmmakers wanted to approach horror. Now, I imagine if you ask these filmmakers were they influenced by Lustig or Scorsese, they're more likely to say Scorsese. And you know, I would say Combat Shock is very much more in line with something like a Taxi Driver or the 70s nihilistic films than Maniac.
Combat Shock and Jim Van Bebber's work and to some extent my own attempt to address the actual society itself as the true cause of the nightmare or the real source of the horrors.
I don't think Buddy jumped on the nihilism bandwagon in this way of Henry or Maniac or anything like that. It was an original idea. Everything Buddy's always done has been original, and no. I don't see that as a sign of the times or anything like that of what's going on.
Combat Shock is sort of like a fusion of the best of what was then the last 15 years or so of New York's independent and alternative film scenes.
There was not a time put on it, so I never labeled it as an 80s movie.
In ways it's very difficult to classify. In any neat box anyways, you can't really compartmentalize it. And I guess you can say, if anything, it belongs to this very limited subgenre of film that you can call, the cinema of personal holocaust.
I think Combat Shock's kind of more of a scream for help than a movie to some extent.
No! He's gone crazy! He's just shot Tobin! Dunlin, cease fire! Dunlin, no! Dunlin!
The relevance of Combat Shock could be applied to the Iraq War.
The film is totally relevant today because, this was back when Buddy made it was more with the perspective of the end of the Vietnam War. But since then, we've had Iraq, Afghanistan, Iraq again.
It would still fly today in this climate of people over in Iraq and all that.
The film will always be relevant, especially as long as there's war. This will always be relevant.
It's all the more relevant now because of the enormous amount of our fellow citizens that have post-traumatic stress disorder and fucking, they don't have limbs and they don't have this and they don't have the care, and our government, the Bush administration, has fucked them out of any sort of care.
I got a family to support, and all the vet programs have been cut. What do they expect me to do?
That's one of the things that our government today sugarcoats. You know, nobody wants to talk about the traumatic experience of being in war and how it affects people in their lives post-war.
You know, there was just an incident in the news. I think this soldier was on his 3rd term in Iraq, and he was undergoing psychiatric treatment in Iraq. And I think he flipped out altogether and just went out, shot 5 or 6 people at this mental clinic facility, I guess. And so it's a real big problem. How do we deal with our soldiers?
It's a kind of a timeless movie. Unfortunately, it's a timeless movie.
They wanted no part of us and took their own way out together. Their wives wouldn't be raped, nor the children tortured and mutilated. They cheated us. Oh, yes, they did.
Somehow Buddy's had really bad luck. He's just walked into all these cultural blind spots, you know? And I don't know if it's just that he's not trendy enough, or they never became sexy in France, or, you know, I don't get it. But fuck the world for not giving Buddy the attention he deserves.
His tenacity to deal with disappointment is unbelievable. I mean, you know, I think I would have hung myself.
Artists reflect the culture they're in. And that's actually a great part of what makes them artists, and what makes other films kind of disappear.
During that era, everyone was playing things so safe that that it was nice to actually, you felt like you'd actually found something that, you know, had an artist, a filmmaker behind it who really had something to say.
Buddy's awesome. I'm kind of tormented that he went to Germany.
The guy's an expatriate. I love him.
He has that Ed Wood thing about him, where it's like I go like, yeah, I can't believe, you know, there's such shit out there, and I can't help you, and you can't get this finance. And he goes, it's all right, I'll write another one. I know what they want now. I'll come back. Just like Ed Wood, that you know, that thing about, you know, oh shucks, I'll do better next time. And that's what I like about the guy.
This is the work of a person who's not making films to be the most popular guy in the room. He's not making films to be a millionaire. He's not making films to get laid. You know, this is a person making films out of absolute primal necessity.
When I originally came here, I thought you were doing a Combat Shock 2. Tell that to Buddy. Get out of Combat Shock 2.